Good morning. Welcome back to the Happy Homestead. I'm Amanda, and today we are going to jump right into our preserving project. So over the weekend, my husband was cleaning out the refrigerator in the garage where it was originally intended to be a beverage fridge. We don't ingest that many beverages, but he really wanted a beverage fridge. And then over time, I've kind of taken it over with milk or that's where all the sauerkraut. There's like 3 gallons of fermented sauerkraut in there, some pickles and potatoes, all kinds of things that I just gradually put things in. So as he was cleaning it out, there are bags of potatoes in there that I have purchased from Azure Standard. Look just like this. This is a 5-pound bag of the Yukon Golds. There's 3 of those, and then there was 1 bag of russets. The 2 Yukon 5-pound bags are still back out there. They're in the fridge, and they're going to be used for when we need to have fresh potatoes on hand. This bag, I believe I'm going to turn into scalloped potatoes. Well, kinda. We're going to slice them really thin, and then I'm going to freeze dry them so that I can make scalloped potatoes over the winter without having to go through the potato slicing process. I also took the russets and put them in my Instant Pot earlier this morning, so they are cooked and they're just cooling a bit. And we're gonna make mashed potatoes with those because they were actually getting really soft. And so I'm gonna make mashed potatoes and put them on the freeze dry trays, which are all behind me here. And we're gonna freeze dry some potatoes. Now, depending on how many trays this fills up, the other thing I'm gonna freeze dry, whether it be in the same batch or a new batch, is some meat. Now, what kind of meat, you ask? I don't know. Please tell me it's not just me that will go into the freezer and find a random piece of meat and be like, well, what is this? Okay, so I think I know what it is, but I'm not 100% certain. We'll find out when we open it. But these are 4 packages. They're each slightly under a pound of grass-fed, pasture-raised, regenerative agriculture beef that we get from a local farm. And so we bought half a cow last March, I believe, of 2022. So over a year ago, almost a year and a half ago. And we're almost through all of that beef. All that's left is bones, which I'm going to be using for stock this month. Probably about 36 or 37 pounds of ground beef. And then I have 4 roasts left, and that's it. And the roasts I'm going to be using 1 at least this month to make roast beef, like for sandwiches. But I needed to pull these out. And so let me tell you what they say, because sometimes this happens. Don't blame your farmer. Don't blame anybody. It just happens. This says beef for stew meat, boneless beef for stew meat. Same with that one. This says beef sirloin boneless, and this says beef stew meat boneless. I don't think they're stew meat. I think they are beef liver. Now, last year in the challenge, I took all of the packages that were labeled beef liver and I actually dehydrated them. And I'll try to find that video and link it so you can see. So you don't have to have a freeze dryer to do anything of what I'm doing today. You can absolutely do it in a dehydrator. It'll just take possibly a lot longer and may not last as long, right? It won't last the 25 years that the freeze dryer can make food last. But I took all the liver that I had labeled properly and dehydrated it into a powder. Let me show you that. This is all that's left from a year, and I'm pretty sure it was up to here, or at least half full when I did it. But this is all that is left we've been using. I keep this in the refrigerator. It is still technically raw beef liver. It was just dehydrated and then powdered. And then I put it in here. And so what I do is I will take 1 or 2 tablespoons, depending upon the amount of food I'm making, and I will add it to meatloaf, chili, hamburgers, casseroles, soups, whatever I can add it to, so that my family and I are getting all of the amazing nutritional benefits of the beef liver, but actually having to ingest the beef liver, because that's just not something we want to do as a meal. So I'm gonna keep this in the refrigerator, open up what we have down here on the counter in these packages. I think it's liver. We're gonna freeze dry it, and then that'll go in Mylar bags to be used after this is done. So I need to get everything on the trays. I am going to pre-freeze my trays. I've kind of gone back and forth about this in my head, but I am gonna pre-freeze everything, and then I'll just film when I put it into the freeze dryer so that you can actually see that process if you're unfamiliar with it, and then we'll see it when it's out. I will have to film the final product. Y'all, a gnat just flew in my mouth. Oh my goodness. Oh. A bug. I think it was a gnat. Oh, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Flew in my mouth as I was talking. Ugh. I don't know if I swallowed him or not. Okay, back to being composed. I'm gonna, like I said, show you everything when it goes in, but the final product, it will at least be tomorrow, if not the next day. So let's get everything worked through. I'm gonna let the potatoes cool so I can actually work with them a bit. And let's go ahead and get these sliced really thin. I don't want to open the meat until the potatoes are done, so I don't have to use 2 cutting boards. I have a mandolin that I'm using for this purpose because I can get my potatoes pretty thin. I have the blade set on 1/8 inch. So I'm just gonna do all the potatoes I can. I don't know how many trays this is gonna fill up. But if you don't have a mandolin, don't fret. You can easily do this by hand. I actually think you could probably also do it in a food processor with the disc slicing attachment. I considered that also. The other thing that I have been reading about with sliced potatoes like this, really any potato product that is cut or sliced, diced, is that you want to blanch them, which means put them in boiling water, put them in ice water, and it basically stops the enzymatic process from continuing. Because when you freeze food, you're not killing the enzymes, you're just slowing them down. And the enzymes in the produce are what actually naturally break a food down. It's just part of nature. And so that process can still happen in the freezer. And by blanching your food, you are stopping the enzymes. You're actually killing the enzymes and preventing them from breaking the food further down. I'm not blanching. I'm gonna give this a try without actually blanching because I imagine I'm gonna be using these potatoes sometime this winter or next spring to make scalloped potatoes. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't blanch. I'm just choosing not to. Okay, all of the potatoes, the scalloped potatoes are sliced. I've got the 4 trays right there, and I'm gonna do a slight change of plans. I actually turned the freeze dryer on to start getting it cooled down. I'm gonna run the scalloped potato batch immediately. Because they're so thin, I'm really hoping that by not pre-freezing them, I'm not wasting too much time. Normally when I put an item in that's already been pre-frozen, it takes between 1.5 to 2 hours for the freeze cycle of the machine to go, and then it will kick in with the vacuum process. By putting something in that's not frozen, clearly that freeze time then extends longer. But again, because the mass is so small of these scalloped potatoes and the surface area, right, I'm really hoping that the freeze time isn't extended a significant amount of time. So I'm just gonna get those in. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get my potatoes mashed and get the mystery meat opened. So when I bought my freeze dryer, I bought a set of 8 trays, so 2 sets of 4, so that I could always have a set in the freeze dryer and another set in the freezer, pre-freezing something ready to go. And I bought those silicone mats, a set of 8 as well, for all of the trays. So if you're ever interested in a freeze dryer, the one thing I would say is get an extra set of trays, because you're gonna want them. And then I got the lids, but I put these lids on whichever trays are gonna go in the freezer, so they can easily stack and I don't have to worry about, you know, finagling the trays and finding room and not having anything touch the food. By putting the lid on, I can easily stack them. Now, when you're doing mashed potatoes, what I've read, this is the first time I'm doing it, but what I have read is that you're not adding your salt, your pepper, your butter, your milk. You're just taking the potato and mashing it. And you also don't want to mash it too much, right? Because potatoes can get pretty gummy if they're overworked. And I don't want that to happen. So I am going to try to mash these as minimally as possible so that I don't have an over gummy potato. And then when you're ready to rehydrate them, I've heard that you rehydrate it with water, and again, don't overwork it when you're rehydrating it. And then once they're hydrated, you can add in your milk, your butter, your salt and pepper to get your mashed potato. Okay, all the potatoes are peeled. Now, I easily could have peeled them first before I put them in the Instapot. I just didn't have time this morning, but you can do that as well. So I'm just using an old-fashioned potato masher and breaking them up, because I cannot have any huge chunks go into the freeze dryer. It's too dense for the freeze dryer to accurately do what it needs to do. So breaking the big chunks up. I also think it's probably a wise idea to pre-freeze your mashed potatoes, because my potatoes are still very warm. So for me to put a warm tray like this in the freeze dryer is just going to make it work harder, use more energy. Not that the freeze dryer uses a ton of energy, and there are other studies, other videos that can kind of show you how much energy it uses. I'm not measuring that. But what I do know is that my freezer is constantly running, and so I would rather put the trays in an appliance that already is running and using energy no matter what, rather than have my freeze dryer go longer. All right, so the freeze dryer has begun the freezing process of the sliced scalloped potatoes. I've got my 2 trays of mashed potatoes behind me. I've got the lids on, so there is a little condensation. I'm just gonna let them sit and cool down before I even put them in the freezer. It is now time to open our mystery meat. Now, if this is not liver, then I am gonna cook whatever meat it is and use it for dinner tonight, possibly. Oh my gosh, this is stew meat. I was wrong. Let's see if this is stew meat. I didn't think I had any stew meat left. Nope, this stew meat. Guys, we have stew meat. I am gonna make something. Maybe can it up actually. Stew meat. All right, what's this one? That is a steak. All right. Pivot. We are going to pivot. All right. I am actually really excited about this. I think this is going to work out much better because I'm looking forward to making what I'm going to make instead of having more liver powder. All right, we're going back to this book. We're going to pressure can is it a meal in a jar? Kind of like a meal in a jar, a little bit. This is on page 150 from the Complete Guide to Pressure Canning book. It's called Venison Steak Diane. We're not using venison. Now this recipe calls for anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds of venison backstrap or tenderloin. I've got about 2.5 to 3 pounds of the stew meat, the beef stew meat. We're gonna add in salt, pepper, some brandy. I have Calvados, which is like an apple brandy. Onion, garlic, shallot, Worcestershire Dijon, beef broth, and tomato paste. And we are going to pressure can it in, it's probably gonna make 3 to 4 quarts. And then what you do when you're ready to use it is you heat a quart on the stove, adding a little bit of heavy cream and just heating it through. You don't wanna boil it because of the cream, and then you can serve it over potatoes or rice. And I think this is going to be so good. So I already have my Dutch oven on the stove with some bacon fat in it. I'm going to sear the stew meat and I'm gonna start adding everything else in. So now I feel like I have to clarify why I thought it was liver. It's not because I don't trust my butcher or my farmer at all. It's because I actually opened a package of, I don't know if it was boneless sirloin or stew meat, I'm not sure which, a few months ago from the freezer. And it was liver. It might have been 2 packages, and it was liver. And so I think I cooked it and we gave it to Marley, our dog. But yeah, that's why I thought that. And so I thought, okay, these packages, I think they're more liver. That was why. But let me tell you, I am really, really excited for this happy accident, because that Steak Diane recipe that I saw in the book the other day when I was looking through it, I had written that down as one that I wanted to make, thinking maybe my husband would get a deer this fall and I could make that. That could still happen, but this is a perfect way to use the stew meat. In the past, I have canned beef stew from the Ball Book of Canning, and it's great. It's good. My family enjoys it. But that's probably been about 3 years in a row that I've done that, and I'm ready to try something different. And so I think this is great because the stew meat can be tough, right? But as it goes through the pressure canner, and it's going to be in there for an hour and a half at that 10 pounds of pressure, it is going to break the meat down and make it so like melt in your mouth. That's the goal, at least. If nothing else, it may have the stew meat texture, but it will have a totally different type of flavor. All right, so the other kicker is that I don't have fresh onion, remember? Or fresh shallot for that matter, because I grew a lot of our shallots, but I freeze dried all of them along with all of our onion harvest. No problem. I'm just gonna add the rest of my freeze-dried onions in this jar, as well as this is shallots. I'm gonna add all of that in here rather than follow the recipe with a fresh one. It's also asking for garlic. I have this teeny little bit of dehydrated garlic left. I think I actually dehydrated this last year during the challenge. It's been in my spice cabinet. I'm just gonna use this and get this jar out. So less chopping for me today. We're gonna start with adding a splash of our Calvados. Onion. Shallot. And garlic. 4 cups beef broth. That's the fat cap that was on the broth. I'm actually not going to add that in. 3/4 cup tomato paste. Just about the whole can. And 2 tablespoons Dijon mustard. All right, so I ended up with 2 quarts and 1 pint. I'll be processing at the quart time. Whenever you have a mixture of items, whether it be, you know, pints, quarts, or even a mixture of, say, stock, green beans, you always want to process for the longer time. I wouldn't be able to process for the pint time and expect my quarts to be safe. So these are going to go for a full 1.5 hours once they get to pressure. So I'll keep you updated on the scallop potatoes and when I put the mashed potatoes in the freezer. When that day comes, that's gonna take at least a day to probably go through its process. And I'll show you these later. So stay healthy, stay well. Thanks for joining. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.